Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk about another book from the Booker Longlist, and that is The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. And what makes this quite an interesting addition to the list, I think, apart from a few other aspects of it, is that this is a book written by a Dutch woman, and typically you see a lot of Booker, particularly for the not for the international Booker, but for the sort of Anglophone Booker, you don't tend to see as many novels written from countries that don't have English as a native language. And so this is kind of an interesting addition to the list. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and go into some parts of it. I will have to go into some spoilers to talk about some thoughts on the book, but I'll sort of signpost that before it comes. And it's a book that I have some sort of mixed feelings about. There's a lot to like about it, a lot that didn't necessarily land for me. But either way, let's talk a little bit about this book. So the core part of the book really focuses on a few different time frames. And actually that's partly where my enjoyment of the book waxes and wanes. But the idea really is largely focused on a young woman called Isabel, and her sort of both personal life and personal history, but also the sort of family history that's bound up in a lot of that. And Isabel herself is growing up, particularly the first part of the book is in the 60s in the Netherlands. And so there's a kind of post-World War II feel of kind of, that now is just enough in the past that it's sort of not brought up too often. In fact, it kind of lingers in the background of this book in quite a haunting way at the beginning, where we sort of know it's there, but we don't necessarily go into a lot of detail about it. And so in many ways, Isabel's life is just her being able to kind of live this post-war life in a way that doesn't really seem to reference the war all that much at that time. And she's quite a difficult character. Isabel is this figure who's a bit kind of blunt, a bit brash in some ways, and she's quite complex. And so we sort of watch her and kind of watch, particularly as a few people around her really struggle to engage with her, because she's just this sort of this sort of odd kind of character. She sort of lives in sort of slightly almost an antisocial existence at times. She's sort of up late. She sort of has these quite antisocial hours, and she's sort of there. And eventually she is introduced to Ava, who is the girlfriend of her brother. And this sort of sparks a fair bit of the rest of the plot of this book moving along in various ways. And this first part of the book, I really greatly enjoyed. I thought it was really brilliantly done in terms of the kind of the tenseness of the language, because Isabel is so sort of tricksy in some ways. There's a kind of coldness and sort of stiffness to her character and to her language that kind of means that the rest of the language sort of dances around her in this really interesting way of, she's awkward and difficult, but the rest of the book is kind of doing all this other stuff around her and trying to explain everything that's going on. And I really enjoyed that part of the book. I thought that was really cleverly done. There's a lot of beauty in the stillness and in the spaces between words. There's a lot that's sort of intuited, and the reader does a lot of work to piece together things that are happening. And I really like that about books. Don't get me wrong. This is a part of the book that I really greatly enjoyed. I thought that was really cleverly done, to kind of have these sort of little details that we as the reader are trying to piece together and understand. And what this then builds into, and this isn't much of a spoiler because it's sort of mentioned in blurbs and a few other things, is that she then sort of builds up this relationship with Ava. It becomes this real sort of sense of intensity between these two women, in a way that feels almost kind of unspoken at times. They just sort of, their lives sort of mesh together, and there's a real passion and intensity to the ways that they engage with each other, and this becomes sort of sexual and romantic in some way. as Nerdy Nurse reads, Alyssa kind of put in her video about this, there's a very sort of horny scene with pears. It's just, there's a lot of kind of very sumptuous, lyrical, sort of sexual, sensual kind of things happening in this book, particularly in this early passage, which I thought was really cleverly done and really, really beautifully done. There's a real intensity, sort of burning, sort of flame that kind of goes throughout that part of the book of their unspokenness around their intensity of sort of sexual feelings and romantic feelings, which I think is really cleverly done and really, really lyrically told. And this sort of becomes this sort of central point in this woman's life of sort of Isabel really kind of coming into her own in some way as well. But the book continues to move, and this is sort of where I think the book then sort of goes into sort of part of its other key message and key idea, which is the idea of a house being a place that can kind of hold that family and personal history as well. And it's difficult to do more of this without going into some spoilers, so I will do in just a second. But I think this is, for me, where the book actually, I think, part of it, maybe as well, I kind of just lost kind of focus or whatever in this part of the book. I still think it's a good book overall, but I'm kind of intrigued by this final part, and it's annoying because it's a thing that I would normally really love in a book. So maybe I need to sort of reread this last sort of quarter of the book, I think. But anyway, let's. If you need to duck out now before I go into some spoilers, please feel free to. But if not, let's get talking about those, and let's get talking about this book. So the book then goes into some sort of different territory in some ways. In many ways, it's very much teased by the early part of the book. But as I mentioned, there's a post-war element of this book, and Isabel finds these old diaries from parts of the family, and this starts to kind of unravel quite a bit of what else is hiding behind this in the book. And this is really pertinent to the fact that this is a book set in the Netherlands. This is very, very true to its history, which is World War II, the Netherlands, and Jewishness. And particularly that so much of the Netherlands, partly by being right next to Germany, was the Jewish populations were decimated massively in the Netherlands. Not only in big cities, it happened kind of all over. And there's something about the way this book interrogates that I think is really clever and really well done, that this book is, and very sensitively done, because these diaries start to point to that kind of sense of hiddenness, that you can't fully understand what's going on all the time in a house. There are sort of these secrets, they're hidden under floorboards and in boxes somewhere, and the people who have moved through that house have lived very, very different lives. And what that then starts to unravel is a little bit about the story of this family, and particularly the sort of their kind of persecution and their kind of relationship to everything that had gone down and happened during World War II, particularly the persecution of Jews. And I think the book is really good at doing this. I think the book interrogates that really powerfully. My only frustration is actually that it felt like such a scene shift for me. When, although it's teased, I don't know, there was something about it almost split the book into three parts for me that then I couldn't quite connect. I almost needed this passage about the family history to be slightly longer or more fleshed out. It kind of happens. There's a particularly one set of scenes that I thought was really poignant, which is just sort of the list of some items in these sort of bullet points, basically. And there's something about the kind of cold, detached nature of that is really well done. But then for me to then shift straight back to Isabel was almost such a, I don't know, it felt like such a scenic shift that I couldn't quite get on board with it. Which is really frustrating. Don't get me wrong, I still think this is a very good book overall. I totally see why people have loved it. For me, it was just sort of the subtleties, which I normally really like, kind of, I just needed a couple of other things to kind of hinge them together personally for me. But I think the character of Isabel is a fascinating one. I think she's really intriguing, and particularly when it then moves to this sort of relationship and this really intense sort of sexual and romantic relationship, or these kind of feelings, I thought that was really well captured. And I think separately, the parts about the family history are really well done. But for me, there's something about the kind of the little hinges and the little moments that connect them that just sort of lost me a bit. And that's my only frustration with this. Again, watch Alyssa's review on this, because I think she does a really great job at pointing out these things, and what's so powerful about the prose and the kind of lyrical nature of it, and the kind of subtlety of the story. But for me, that subtlety just needed a couple of little things to hold it together slightly differently. But that is my opinion. That is what I'm doing. I am only offering my opinion. If this book makes the shortlist, I wouldn't be surprised, nor would I be angry. It's just not fully my cup of tea, but I think it's a very good and decent cup of tea for other people. With that, and because I'm just sweating in this heat that we're having here, I'm going to stop there. Take care, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please try and avoid spoilers in the comments if you can, just for people who haven't read the book yet. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.